Good morning from Washington, D.C., and good afternoon, good evening from whichever place of the world you are connecting to this call. We are all set to start this event. Today's event will be chaired by Rachel Turner, Director, Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office, FCDO, United Kingdom. She will present in opening remarks and chair this event, and we will navigate through the rest of the session. Over to Rachel.
Thank you very much, Srini, and hello everybody. As Srini said, my name is Rachel Turner. I'm from the UK Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office, which is the new UK institution formed out of the Department for International Development and the Foreign Office. So thank you very much for inviting me today. So I was just going to say a few quick words by way of opening, and apologies that I'm just on the phone and not on camera. But this is a great report that we're launching today, and I did want to start just by congratulating all the teams who've worked on it. You know, the UK has been proud to be engaged with the PEFA program since its inception 20 years ago, actually, and I think we all know that the PEFA framework has become the de facto diagnostic tool for analysing PFM systems. I think there have been over 650 assessments in 153 countries with income levels, you know, ranging from Afghanistan to Germany, and that is quite an extraordinary achievement. And I think this global report 2020 really does represent an important step. I think it's the first time all the PEFA data has been put together to examine global trends under the program. So this really is quite a milestone, actually, and I think it's right that we reflect very carefully on what we learned and what the report tells us. And I guess, to be honest, it is telling us quite a stark story. You know, in strengthening PFM systems has been on the agenda of governments and development community partners for a number of decades now. And of course, progress has been made. But I think it's also clear from the report that there are still some very, very important questions that remain about how best to achieve real, concrete, and locked-in, lasting progress. And those are questions, I think, for partners and for governments and the fiscal systems alike. So I know today we're going to debate some of those critical questions. We're going to look at what we've learned so far and what the data tells us. You know, I think the questions, they really do jump out when you read the report. I think there are probably three main questions that maybe we can have in front of us as we debate. I think one is just to really understand what has actually been achieved and what hasn't in terms of our overall objectives. So do we see more effective, efficient, accountable public services being delivered, you know, or don't we? You know, what does success feel like? So there's a set of questions there. Of course, there are some very specific issues raised by the current crisis and the current shock. But these also just bring to the fore the importance of fiscal systems being shock responsive, rather than shocks being an excuse for poor outcomes. So I think there's a key set of issues about flexibility, contingency, shock responsiveness, what happens when decisions have to be made at speed, what happens when shocks mean that accountability is harder than it might otherwise have been, and how do we create accountability over contingency and flexibility. And then I think, of course, there's a set of questions about how partners can best support partner governments through this process and around, of course, the PEFA program itself. And I think always, before we're very aware that development partners can be part of solutions, but also part of the problem. So I hope we can have an honest discussion about, how development partners have helped or may indeed hinder accountability. And I think those old debates around the role of development partners in obfuscating maybe the clarity of fiscal position haven't had so much airtime recently as development partners' relative share of financing goes down, but nevertheless should still be spoken about. So I suppose, just to, so I think those are the three big questions. And then I think two kind of final thoughts from me. I mean, I think we all know, and many of us in partners, of course, live and breathe in our own fiscal systems, but we all know that public financial management reform is not just about technical knowledge, technical skills and systems, but, equally, if not more, it's about incentives, it's about politics, and it's about behaviors. So how do we engage in a system that is so inherently political? I think, I think that the second thing I would really stress is about accountability and oversight. And, where have we got to with accountability and oversight? And what does that really, what does good accountability and oversight actually feel like and mean? And what do the links between accountability and oversight systems really need to be to make sure that we have the flexible, nimble, tough systems that citizens are owed? So, I think two key questions there, but at the heart of those is the importance of not just allowing ourselves to only discuss the technical, but to kind of raise our heads and think about the wider system. But let me thank you again for the report and all the work that's gone in it. It really is a rich read, and I think an important read, actually, for anybody engaging on either the expenditure side or the revenue side, actually. And I thought the interplay with the revenue side came out very well in the report, but that also raises important issues for us. So I think those were the main things I wanted to say by way of introduction. I know we're going to hear a lot today from the other panelists. I will just say who they are, and then I think when I've said who the other panelists are, we are then going to hear from the Secretariat itself, who are going to present the report. So I'm absolutely delighted today that we've got Mr. Dajunim Dorji, who's the Finance Secretary from Bhutan. We've got Mr. Pinaki Chakraborty, who's the Director from the National Institute for Public Finance and Policy from the Ministry of Finance in India. Mark Miller from ODI, and then Hakken who's from the Norwegian Agency for Development Cooperation. And of course, we also have Ed, who most of you know, Ed Olowo-Okere, who's the Global Director of the Governance Global Practice from the World Bank. So we're going to hear from all those panelists as well. But Srini, at this point, let me hand back over to you. And I think you're going to try and actually now run the rest of the session, as I've had trouble dialing in on the actual WebEx, on the WebEx video call. But thank you again, and I'm looking forward to a rich discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rachel. That sets the rolls the session very well and sets the tone. Let me quickly share my screen. So we start with a presentation from the PEFA Secretariat on the highlights of the report. Friends, the big question is, are public financial management reforms really working? We all know public financial reform, management reforms are important. Governments have been investing a lot, but how are they performing? Countries to identify the performance and monitor over a period of time have done PEFA assessments. We have 154 PEFA assessments in 154 countries have done PEFA assessments, over 675 PEFA assessments. So this wealth of data is there at a country level, but is it there at a kind of a global and regional level? This question triggered us to put together this first ever highly interactive, fully online global report on public financial management, looking at all the publicly available data and analyzing trends and putting it together. It's already live on the PEFA website. I hope some of you had already opportunity to navigate through and enjoy the report. It has 6 sections, the report as such, and I'm going to concentrate on the third section, the global PFM trends, but at the same time go a bit into the specifics relating to Asia and Africa. So to go into the session, let me ask you a question. Think for yourself, if whole of the world, if you are doing one global PEFA, for example, assessing the PFM systems of all countries, adding together, how would you rate the PFM systems of the world as a whole on a scale from A to D? Would it be very good A or really not good, which is D? We left this LinkedIn poll yesterday, and last night in Washington DC time, this is the way the responses of some of the participants, I guess many of you have connected, show up. So A, excellent, is 18%. B, which is like very strong systems. C, acceptable. And D, 9%, not at all good. So please guess for yourself now. So what would be the global score? And I get to it on the next slide. So it's not A or B, it's C. So you get an aggregate score out of 4. You get 2.3 as the aggregate score if you add up all the publicly available PEFA reports, which is also a good news, because which means there's a lot of scope for quick improvements. There's no reason for complaining about PFM systems unless we have strong PFM systems. Region-wise, if you see, predictably, Europe and Central Asia have been doing better. South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa have ample opportunities to quickly improve. Typically, national PFM systems are stronger when compared to subnational PFM systems. And there are variations across regions, even on specific aspects, not at aggregate level. This one is about budget execution, and you can see the variations between different countries, which means different strategies are required for different regions. This is a regional variation. Now let me come to specific areas. PFM is about planning, budget preparation, budget execution, and budget evaluation covered through 7 pillars from PEFA lens. How are countries doing on this? So generally, countries are performing better on policy-based fiscal strategies and budgeting. This includes having a medium-term perspective in budgeting, budget documentation, having a lot of things, a lot of requirements included in the budget documentation. These are going well. Also, debt management, which many of us these days believe that it's an area of worry, is also from PEFA results seems to be accounting and management doing well. Where are the shortcomings? The shortcomings are largely into tax collection, then the external audit and accountability, major shortcomings at a global level you find from the PEFA reports. Over time, what's happening? Are countries improving from 2000 to 2021? Have countries improved on their PFM performance? Good news is that countries are improving. Over a period of time, we have better PFM systems than the past. There are several examples also of deterioration. Some reasons could be exogenous reasons like natural disasters, conflicts, even a health crisis like COVID-19 could impact in some countries. So there are exogenous reasons. Then PFM is a mechanical, is a technocratic exercise of how to do and not what to do. So the policy decisions of government typically on whether, how much subsidies to give, what should be the level, movement of funds budget in a year from one sector to another. These are policy decisions. And even in strong PFM systems are there in various other levels, these decisions could influence scores because you also cover budget credibility as a part of PFM system. So the result is that you have good performance, but you need to be cautious about the weaknesses and continuously improve. And that's where PFA assessments are useful as a monitoring tool to assess progress over a period of time. Let me now turn to some regions. Let me start with South Asia. What are the areas where South Asia can make real fast, quick, great progress? When I say fast, quick progress and list out all these pillars that you see, these are areas which are actually weak in South Asia, which are scoring out of a maximum possible 4 less than 2. That's the benchmark for you making this slide. So let me take 2 examples in this. Revenue outturn is the variation from the planned revenues, which is a cause of concern. South Asia is not doing well as when compared to the world. And another key area is central government operations. As much as 10% of central government operations are outside financial reports in many countries. And this is a kind of a typical cause of worry. So these are all these areas flagged here. There are reforms going on in many countries which are expected to make progress. But since they are at the current stage weak, probably the progress would be much faster once the reforms are implemented. Let me come to Sub-Saharan Africa, a bigger spider, a lot more items. Predictably, looking at the overall score that Sub-Saharan Africa has not been doing too well on PFM when compared to the world. So let me pick here again two issues. In one, expenditure areas has been a major issue in Sub-Saharan Africa. Not knowing how much is the areas and not managing the areas has been a challenge. IFMIS, Treasury Single Account kind of reforms in many countries are doing. Just to give an example, Ghana recently worked very consciously on this agenda to fix that. So these are the kinds of issues where quick progress is possible on this key issue. Another area in Sub-Saharan Africa as a weakness is generally the overall management of assets. Public investment decisions, where to invest funds, capital investments, and how to manage their assets. This is an area this region has a big gap, as you see from PEFA reports as well as PIMA and other technical reports that come up. Let me now go to East Asia and Pacific. Thankfully, you see that less number of items flagged here, which means all the budget preparation and execution generally are comparable to rest of the world, and it's more the accountability audit aspects which are a bit weak in the area, which could possibly be improved. Typically, external audit and the scrutiny of audit reports in Parliament. Great work going on, for example, in Philippines, Indonesia, and several other countries in this direction. Let me now turn to MENA region, Middle East and North Africa. So here again, you have quite a few which are currently underperforming, which can scale up fast. Typical example is also the time it takes for the financial reports preparation, delays in financial report preparation, conduct of the audit, and review by the legislature. This cycle itself, which involves work at the accountant general and equivalent level, including implementation of strong accounting standards, and then moving into audit by the Supreme Audit Institution and overview by the legislature of this, like through the Public Accounts Committee and other mechanisms. This is a typical example I picked for MENA region as an area for possible quicker improvement. So generally, a broader reflection on all these areas where we say quick wins are possible, we need to unpack further. Some areas are clear quick wins, whereas others like public investment management, long-term asset management, may not necessarily be having immediate results. And when we look at PFM progress, we need to also unpack further into reforms which look good on paper, which can be done well on paper with reasonable success, and connect it with execution, actual change it makes in terms of overall allocative efficiency and service delivery, and build the reforms thereafter. Let me now turn to my colleague, Julia, to take us through the rest of the report, and we'll come back later to the panel. Julia.
Thank you so much, Srini. So let me cover the other three sections of the global report. The one on case studies. So in addition to the presentation of the global and regional PFM trends that Srini walked us through in detail, the global report also features a presentation of selected case studies. And why did we do that? So the main rationale was to try to complement the high-level overview of the PFM trends with a more in-depth analysis of the strengths and weaknesses at the country level. And this very first edition of the global report, we are featuring Argentina. So the PEFA assessment of 2019 was the first ever PEFA assessment for Argentina. The second country that we featured was Ukraine. And Ukraine is quite interesting because has conducted 4 PEFA assessments so far, but it's the first country in the world that with a successive assessment using PEFA 2016 framework. And by looking at the data and the time series that comes from rich PEFA assessment reports, the user can see how the country has improved and progressed over time. And some of the key areas that we see improvements is first related with the budget credibility, transparency of public finances, as well as external scrutiny and audit. Another interesting case that we are featuring this year is the report of Ethiopia. So all in all, Ethiopia has conducted 4 PEFA assessments. And the last one was an extremely interesting case because the PEFA assessment report, in addition to identifying the strengths and weaknesses of the PFM system, went one step further and analyzed the relationship between PFM performance and service delivery. So some of the key highlights from the PEFA assessment report. So budget credibility seems to be quite strong. And this is the result of the tight macroeconomic fiscal framework, which set the tone for expenditure management. However, on the weak side, public access to fiscal information is poor. And there is a disconnect between the medium-term fiscal framework and the annual budget. And finally, the fourth case study is West Bank and Gaza. So what is interesting in the case of West Bank and Gaza is that they developed and they made publicly available performance indicator for many core services, aiming to improve fiscal transparency. The next session of the report focused on the global trends in integrating gender in the design, implementation, and evaluation of the budget policies, and why we have done that. So the section 5 of the global report and the future editions of it will always focus on exploring the links between public financial management and broader development outcomes, including linking it with sustainable development goals. And for this year, the very first edition of the global report, we decided to look at the linkages between PFM and SDG 5 on gender equality. And as you might all know, PEFA Secretariat has launched the supplementary framework for assessing gender responsive public financial management. And the framework has already been conducted and applied in many countries. And we thought it will be important to take stock of this gender assessment and highlight some key trends and key findings. So overall, I mean, what are the main takeaways from the analysis of the PEFA assessment on gender being conducted? So we see that the government integrate gender in PFM in various ways, and there are different instruments and PFM tools to use. However, mainstreaming gender across the budget cycle is relatively limited. And the most common practices that we encountered and we saw in integrating gender relates first with the preparation of the gender budget statement, as well as the evaluation of the gender impact of the budget policies and programs. And we look at both the revenue and the expenditure side. So this section, in addition to providing an analysis of the gender PEFA assessment, also present a significant number of case studies to show, to document how countries have used different gender PFM tool in their efforts to streamline gender in the PFM system. The last section of the global report is what we call it a call to action. And as you see, I mean, we have listed quite a lot of ideas for further research and analysis. For instance, one of them that it's quite important, and it's at the core of the debate that we are having in the course of COVID-19, relates with PEFA, PFM, and service delivery. So how we can have an understanding and how we can strengthen the linkages between PEFA and service delivery. So there are a lot of ideas for analysis, and we invite all the PEFA researchers and users to let us know if they have any idea for further analysis and research. I also want to highlight that the global report, it is the first time that we have made publicly available the full panel data set of the PEFA assessment report publicly available. So the PEFA users, the researchers, everyone interested can download the data set, the report, can play around with it and conduct interesting research. So I invite you all to browse the report, to explore it, to download, and I really hope that you will enjoy it as much as we at the PEFA Secretariat enjoyed by crunching the PEFA data and also preparing the report and finally making it available for you. I'll stop here and I'll hand it over to my colleague Tia to make a demo of the global report. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Julia. You have heard now the key messages of the report. What I'm going to do is very briefly give you a bit of a teaser what the report actually looks like. So you know that the report is online. This is what the first page looks like, but you can also view it in your mobile device or in your tablet device as well. If we have a quick look at the report, when you open it up, you can see executive summary and the key messages, and then you can go and have a quick look at the structure of the report itself. As you've heard, we have a section on PEFA. We have a section on methodology in terms of the report. Then we have a section on global PFM performance that sets those global key trends out. Section on year in review on the case studies that Julia just talked about, gender responsiveness and call to action. I'll just show you very quickly the section on global PFM performance. And if we have a quick peek at the budget reliability, and I will show you a couple of interactive elements of the report. This is, first of all, this is an example of a map that we have. This particular map looks at trends and scores on budget reliability per indicator for each country that we have had a PFA assessment for. If you go on a particular country, you can see more details of that country performance, overall score as well as scores per indicator. We have also an example of a chart this chart looks at, again, scores for budget reliability, but this looks at global averages per indicator. Again, if you go on the top of the chart, you can see a bit more details. If you want to share the visualizations, you can do it very easily by clicking on the right-hand corner, and you can share them by social media or by email. At the end of the report, you can also download all these visualizations in one go. And on the left-hand side, you can see the structure of the report, and it's relatively easy to navigate. And again, at the end of the report, you can download the whole report, or as Julia said, you can download all the raw data that we have used for the report for your own analysis and research as well. That's mainly the report. We hope that you enjoy it. We hope that you really use it for your own analysis and policy discussions as well. Please also visit us in our website, PEFA.org, or follow up in social media. We are sharing, of course, all the publicly available PEFA assessments, as well as case studies, guidance, and other news items that might be of interest to you. And of course, please feel always to welcome us at the PEFA Secretariat if you have any questions, suggestions, or ideas. Thank you very much. I will now pass on to Richard and the rest of the PEFA team to move on to the panel discussion. And if I may just remind all the panelists who are actually sharing their screens that you may want to use that and restart the videos if they have turned off during the presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tia, and thank you everyone for that very interesting presentation on the global report. Welcome to this panel discussion. My name is Richard Sutherland, and it's my very pleasure to moderate today's conversation together with my colleagues from the PEFA Secretariat, Srini and Tia. Just to give you a bit of overview, the topic for today's discussion is PFM, Public Financial Management in the 21st Century. And we're looking specifically at the implications of the findings of the global report for PFM policy, practice, and research. We will focus on PFM-related challenges and opportunities in a post-COVID world. The fact is, COVID is a reality and it will continue to be so for the short term into the medium term. So we'll be looking at drawing out certain lessons that could be learned from the experience of the pandemic and what we need to do differently going forward from a PFM perspective as governments, development partners, researchers, and so on. So now this conversation will be particularly centered on the challenges being faced by the Africa and Asia regions of the world. So the panelists are kindly invited to reflect on this context in their responses to the questions that will be asked. Now, what we're discussing again is an important topic. We have not much time to discuss it with our esteemed panelists. You were introduced earlier, so I won't go into that. Let me, though, outline how the discussion will take place. To ensure we make the best use of time, we're breaking up the discussion in 2-3 distinct chunks. First of all, we want to know what the panelists think of the overall topic, so we'll start there with 2 rounds of questioning. I'll moderate the first round of questions and Srini will moderate the second round. The first round will have one-on-one questions with the panelists, while the second round will be a bit more dynamic. After that, we will have an open discussion with the panelists with questions from the audience. You'll be invited to submit your questions in the chat, where that will be monitored by my colleague Tia, and we will then ask the questions to the panelists. We will address as many questions as we can during the panel discussion, so please feel free to submit your questions. Okay, so let me get right into our first round of questions. These will ask the speakers about their different perspectives on what can be learned about doing PFM reforms right. Let me start with Mr. Nim Dorji. Mr. Dorji, from the government of Bhutan's perspective, can you please share with us what you consider the most important lesson about PFM reform? Particularly, what you think makes PFM reform successful? And equally important, what could cause them to fail? Please share any specific examples you may have from your own experiences. Over to you, Mr. Doji.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Richard. Thank you for the PEFA Secretariat for presenting this very comprehensive first global PFM report. It's very interesting to see, and then be happy to be part of this very important engagement with the PEFA Secretariat. I'm also happy to be a panelist on this PFM for the 21st century, and especially harnessing data for policy making. On the reform, Bhutan has a long history of PFM reforms. We started off in a very simple and humble way, but now we have reached to a very advanced stage of PFM reform. For PFM is at the core of all development initiatives in Bhutan, and PFM serves as the basis for promoting good governance. So therefore, PFM has a very important role. Then what has happened in Bhutan is PFM has evolved over that period, and this changes has been in keeping with the development, both in economic development and also level of development that we can see for the country. What we can see is that as we evolve over the period, the system, the PFM system, and then the capacity development has evolved. What is interesting to note is that the PFM system that provides the basis of decision making, especially in terms of aggregated and disaggregated fiscal numbers, that provides policy making, has helped to decide on projects, help to decide on various development initiatives. What we have also done is that as we have evolved over the period, just to assess the standard and the quality of the PFM, Bhutan has engaged in the PEFA assessment in 2010 and 2016. And based on these findings, we have embarked on a structured reform, which presently we are under implementation. And through the assessment, what we have noticed is that our PFM processes in Bhutan are in keeping with the best practices, but there are certain areas which lacked, especially in the legislative scrutiny of the budget appropriation bill. And similarly, in terms of transparency in reporting in-year budget reports, and also public information on public procurement. So there were certain deficiencies identified. So we have worked on that, and that has helped us to strengthen our legislative process of the budget appropriation bill. At the same time, promoted electronic government procurement system, where we now maintain all public contracts awarded in the system, so that helps us to understand all these PFM processes. Then similarly, on the legislative front, we had till 2006, we did not have any laws, but we was guided by rules and regulation. And now we have rules and regulations, laws in place guiding public financial management. So these have helped us to strengthen. So these are some of the success stories of PFM in Bhutan. Well, at the same time, there could be lapses in terms of PFM, in the sense that if the reforms are not supported by capacity, human resources, capacity, and reliable system, there could be failures. For example, when we migrated from standalone budgeting and accounting system to online real-time system, there were lots of information lost in the transition. So when we are not prepared in terms of both capacity and equipment, so this reform initiative can simply be delayed and loss of information on the way. This is just one example. And another example could be implementation of PFM at the local government level without adequate capacity. One individual handling all PFM transactions by an individual without the maker and checker concept, then it leads to, there is a risk of maneuvering the PFM system by an individual. So these are some of the examples that we have. On the whole, the PFM reform strategy that we are presently implementing provides lots of opportunity for us to strengthen. For example, the budgeting system has moved away from activity-based budgeting to a multi-year rolling budget. The accounting system has moved away from check-based payment to electronic payment system. The traditional procurement process has been replaced with electronic government procurement system. So these are some of the examples that we have as part of the successful reform story in Bhutan. What is important also is to note that now going forward, the whole taxation system is being reformed. For example, the sales tax is being replaced by a smart GST system. Then we also working very closely with the IMF to have this chart of accounts replaced with our traditional ones. And then finally, converging into a single treasury account. So these are some of the major reforms that we have put it online. And this is what I could say, the success stories. If you have a strong PFM system, the whole good governance becomes very strong, and then the decision making becomes very simple because all decisions are made on fiscal numbers, and that helps us to boost the decision making process in our economic development and also in the day-to-day functioning of the government agencies. So this is what I could highlight, and I'll stop here.
Thank you so very much, Mr. Doji, for sharing Bhutan's very interesting reform experience. Indeed, it's congratulations on the many successes you've had. Turning to Mr. Pinaki Chakraborty, Mr. Doji's examples have underscored a broader issue. Many countries have made huge investments to improve public finance through training, technology, and capacity development, as Mr. Doji has highlighted. Even so, tangible, concrete improvements in PFM seem to be taking place only in a handful of these countries. Why? Have we ignored the political economy of PFM reforms? And how does India tackle the challenge of ensuring strong PFM capacity at both the central and the state government levels? Mr. Chakraborty? Mr. Pinaki, your microphone is muted.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Srini. Thank you for inviting me. Before I start, I just wanted to say that this is a very important report, rich in content and provides significant amount of data on public financial management globally. The context is also very important. This data and the findings of the report will be important to take into account when one is talking about post-COVID fiscal challenges and fiscal architecture that we have to think of, given that there is contraction of growth and contraction of revenue globally, and expenditure needs have increased multifold. So we are talking about this report in that context. Now, if we talk about goals of the PFM system, as all of us know, fiscal discipline during the budget planning and execution in accordance to the fiscal rules like FRBM targets, fiscal transparency to reflect the fiscal risk and liabilities, strategic budgeting and planning to meet the policy priorities, operational technical efficiency in developing expenditures towards policy outcome in terms of specific objectives. Now, this can be done with a mix of institutional reforms. And let me first talk about, as we have started with, use of modern technology to make public expenditure system more efficient. I would say that we need to look at both the revenue as well as the expenditure side of the budget when you're talking about public financial management, because revenue shock can really destabilize expenditure patterns or what is allocated to be spent as estimates. So digitization of both taxes on the taxes side as well as on the expenditure side has played a major role in augmenting revenue in India if you look at from 2005-6 to 2009-10. And there were a lot of discussion about direct benefit transfers, reducing subsidies, reaching more people in a targeted manner. Now, a couple of challenges I would like to highlight in this context. One is when you're talking about PFM reform in Indian context. This has been done with a mix of institutional reforms and use of modern technology. Now, as I said, one example was the direct benefit transfer. But intergovernmental relations also plays a crucial role because we are talking about a country where 60% of the government expenditure is at the state level, and it's a very diverse country where per capita income differs widely across states. So is the fiscal capacity. So it's very important to understand, what is happening in Indian states in terms of public financial management. There are important innovations that has happened, and there was a PEFA assessment that was done for India in 2011 by NIPFP, and that gives very important insight into what is happening. Now, one issue that I would like to highlight, and that's a story of last 15, 20 years, and the issue of fiscal responsibility and budget management. I think one success of fiscal prudence, if I have to highlight, that will be the operation of the Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management Act, particularly at the state level. And we have seen how the fiscal prudence has been ensured by introducing Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management Act. There are now all the states have medium-term expenditure frameworks, the medium-term fiscal plan for the next 3 years when a budget is presented. So you have a medium-term fiscal outlook. Of course, there are scope for improvement of those plans. You can make it more predictable. One can always talk about improvement of those plans, but there is a lot of transparency in terms of what government is thinking in terms of fiscal management at the subnational level as well as the national level with this medium-term expenditure framework. So in that context, I would also like to highlight that you asked me of the political economic question. I think what is most important to understand in this context globally is Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management Act is a necessary condition for fiscal prudence and public financial management, but it is certainly not the sufficient condition. So we really have to, for sufficiency, we need to have greater fiscal transparency. We need to have greater understanding of public sector borrowing requirement, of budget liabilities, and downside fiscal risk. I think that downside fiscal risk is going to go up as we navigate the COVID time, because revenues are contracting globally, growth is contracting globally, and government expenditure need is going up. So in that context, I would also like to highlight that some of the indicators that we use in PEFA, we probably have to disaggregate to analyze, in a COVID situation, because government has been intervening in a situation where revenues have been contracting, but at the same time, there are certain areas where support has to be given, and those supports are probably health, probably redistribution, probably livelihood security, and also mobility. How do you ensure mobility for market exchange? I think these are very important fiscal decisions that governments going forward will have to take, and government has been taking. So in that context, there will be deviation between what was budgeted and what has actually been spent, and there will be a lot of reprioritization of government expenditure from expenditure side A to expenditure side B, depending on what is most important at the current moment. So I think when we have more data, more information, we'll also be able to understand what is happening as far as a more nuanced understanding of what is happening, at the general government level, at the state level, also in various parts of the global south in terms of fiscal management in the context of COVID. I also wanted to highlight that our PFM system, or for that matter, in each country, the question of public financial management is always a dynamic one. It's not something. We are also not doing a comparative static exercise. So that dynamic aspect of PFM management will have to be taken into consideration. And the last point I'll make in this context is the issue of budgetary financing. I think this has got important implications for public financial management, and if the sources of financing are volatile, in that case it becomes very, very critical, very, very difficult to manage the expenditure side of the budget, and you see a lot of deviations. But if the sources of financing are stable in terms of whether it is borrowing, whether it is domestic revenue, we see that volatility much less. So I think it is very important to get to those kind of issues of macro fiscal management to understand the kind of assessment we get as a result of the indicator-based approach in public financial management. So I stop at that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chakraborty. Mr. Hakken, are you still with us? I know you're connected by phone.
Yes, I am, Richard.
Perfect, perfect. Now, Mr. Chakraborty has highlighted the issues of fiscal responsibility, fiscal prudence at the central government level, and he also highlighted the importance of looking at PFM reforms from a more nuanced perspective to understand and to better address issues that concern public finances. Now, PFM reform is traditionally seen as a technical field, separate from priorities such as health and education and even climate change. If our chair this morning raised this as an important issue, what are your perspective on this viewpoint that PFM is a technical field and should be separated from sectoral issues? Should PFM professionals continue to maintain that strengthening oversight and the budget cycle at the central level is the true, let's say, is the true focus of PFM? Or should they divert away from that focus to look more at tackling issues at the sectoral level to help ensure that concrete outcomes are delivered in specific sectors? What are your perspectives on this issue?
Oh, thank you, Richard, and thank you to the PEFA Secretariat for the report. Sorry for participating by audio. We also had some problems with the WebEx connection. But firstly, on your question, Richard, I would say that tackling PFM-related bottlenecks in specific sectors can be very important for the service delivery. And we know that better PFM supports the flow of resources to service delivery and provides a basis for financial fiduciary controls. And PFM also provides incentives more broadly for allocating and spending public money more efficiently. And from several studies, we have numerous examples of misallocations of resources and funds being delayed or not dispersed at all, and general lack of accountability in sectors, especially a challenge in low and middle-income countries. However, although we know that PFM matters, it has proven difficult to evidence, particularly PFM reform measures that can drive improvements in service delivery. And there are reasons for that. Effective relies on a much broader set of public management processes and not PFM alone. And we know that the more complex the task is, the more difficult it is to develop clear theories as to what works. But so the links here between PFM reforms and service delivery is complex, but is really worth exploring more. We have seen this has been challenged as part of the COVID-19 crisis to have a PFM system that can react fast, reallocate resources, and get it out to service delivery. So this is an important area to look further into, and the PEFA program is also looking at this work, and we already heard here from Ethiopia where they use the PEFA framework, has adjusted it to assess if and how PFM bottlenecks affect the service delivery in the sectors. And we see other countries also use the PEFA framework in that way countries like Mozambique, Bangladesh, and upcoming Sudan. At the same time, I would say that strengthening the overall budget cycle at central level is still fundamental also for service delivery outcomes. We know that strong overall PFM systems is important for achieving aggregate fiscal discipline. And we saw from the presentation earlier that aggregate expenditure outturns scores low in several countries, as in we saw a lower score in Sub-Sahara, and we also heard that revenue outturns scores low. There were some examples from South Asia. So there are still huge challenges on improving budget credibility. So there is still fundamentals to be done here. And the same we saw on systems for having strategic allocation of resources. We saw that the low scores in composition outturns in Sub-Sahara and South Asia. So in addition to the role of efficient delivery by improving the execution of the budget, we need to have a whole perspective, and this also include having functioning control systems broadly, and also the oversight function. As we heard also from the global report, the external audit function, as an example, scores very low. So there are still challenges here also. So to conclude, I would say to your question, Richard, PFM professionals should engage in tackling bottlenecks in sectors, but still have a focus on the overall budget cycle. And I think both will matter for outcomes at service delivery level. Thank you, Richard.
Many thanks, Hakken, for your perspectives on that. So a balanced approach is what you're advocating. I also heard you loud and clear that it is difficult to evidence PFM's role in driving service delivery outcomes due to complexities, and we need to learn more. So let me turn now to Mark Miller. There is broad consensus, Mark, on that PFM matters for development outcomes. But as Hakken has said, much research is still needed. The data is, the relationship is contested. How can we as a PFM community convince decision makers, development partners that PFM is still critical to meet their priorities? How can PFM be made more effective in Asia and Africa?
Thanks, Richard, and thanks all for the invitation to speak. So good question. How can we convince finance ministries or decision makers and development partners that PFM is critical? I mean, I don't think finance ministries need much convincing about the importance of PFM. They're dealing with it on a day-to-day basis, and using it for some very, very difficult problems at the moment, sort of dealing with a huge fiscal crisis. So I don't think decision makers need much convincing that PFM is important. My development partners, I think if you speak to people who work, I don't know, in the FCDO, NORAD, I think they would recognize that a capable state is absolutely fundamental to supporting development, and PFM is, a central part of what it is to be a capable state. And so I'm not sure these people need much convincing either. I do think my sense is that civil servants often struggle to make the case on PFM to their ministers and taxpayers, in development partners. I think it's easier to sell the idea of providing, I don't know, money or vaccines or school, school buildings than it is on strengthening audit processes. And I think that's why development partners have been very keen to try and draw clearer narratives about the relationship between PFM and development outcomes like gender equity, like climate change, like service delivery. I think, and these are obviously very, very desirable things. I do think that can pose some challenges. At the moment, we're seeing that, my sense is that finance ministries today probably, challenges about dealing with, a lack of money coming in, revenue falls, having to revisit fiscal forecasts, negotiating with creditors, dealing with debt problems. And so how much are their priorities aligned with development partner priorities is an important question, because I do think there is a risk that governments are overloaded with trying to do too many reforms. I think the other issue in convincing development partners is about, I think everyone on this call would agree that PFM is very important for achieving development outcomes. But I think it's one thing to recognize that, and another thing to actually be able to say, so if we invest in it, we'll therefore see improvements. And I think one of the things that the report shows is actually, okay, we recognize that PFM is very important, but it's actually proven quite difficult to change. And so I think there's another part of sort of convincing development partners, I suppose, is, in seeing the results of their investment. And I think PEFA, has been an enormously useful tool for development partners in that respect, in as far as they've been able to measure and track progress. But in some senses, it also provides a bit of a rod for PFM's own back in a good way, because it is highlighting that change is very difficult and takes a long time. Just one kind of final point around, you asked how to make PFM more effective in Asia and Africa, which is clearly a sort of an enormous question. And, the data shows that the challenges are varied. My colleagues on the panel are much better placed to say, how to make PFM more effective in Bhutan or India, where, the challenges are going to be very, very different. And I think, that was one of the initial reasons for coming up with the PEFA framework, was to help countries design reform programs that responded to their own priorities. And I think we do need to kind of keep that front and center as this framework goes forward. How surprised should we be, for example, that there is a gap between scores in different regions in the world? Some finance ministries simply have much smaller resources to draw upon. If you're let's just take a small country where a finance ministry of 50 people, should we expect that finance ministry to be, scoring the same as a finance, the UK Treasury, where there's 1,200 odd people? I don't think we should be expecting them to score the same. And so I think that then raises very important questions about prioritization. And I've seen some kind of comments on the chat about that. And, I'm happy to next round kind of offer some thoughts around that. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Miller. Convincing taxpayers can be challenging about that PFM matters. And if we invest in PFM, we can see the results in the future. Now, these are important comments. I'm just drawing from your response, Mark. And let me turn over to Ed to elaborate a bit on this. Ed, the global report indicates that many countries perform debt management functions well. And as Mark said, many are expecting that if you invest in a certain function of PFM, then you will reap the benefit of that investment. However, many countries are now in debt distress. There are several concerns about sustainability, credible reporting, transparency, many other issues. What can we do better to support debt management? I mean, we've already invested in it. We're seeing the scores improving, but what more can we do? Ed?
Thanks, Richard. This is a very important and I think topical question. But maybe let's start by first unpacking the PEFA score on debt management. So I think what the global report is telling us is that debt management systems are broadly in place. Now, it is critical that the debt information itself is more comprehensive, robust, credible, and timely. I think that is the challenge that we are talking about. So we have a system in place, but what is that system really producing? Is it producing the information that is really needed to be able to ensure debt sustainability? So countries, as we know in Asia, in Africa, that we are focusing on now, continue to struggle with debt reporting. They need to improve the integrity of financial data underpinning debt reporting. I mean, you go into some of these countries, the debt reports are done in some spreadsheets and some in the computer system, and you just have things being added together. So, but in order for them to be able to really have comprehensive and reliable financial data for debt reporting, there is a need to implement accounting reforms. And I would say accounting reforms based on accrual basis of accounting. You must have asked, and this is a question for also our audience to reflect on. We don't have the same challenge with the private sector organizations. British Airways, Ford Motors, General Electric, and so on and so forth. They produce, they borrow money and so on and so forth. And they produce reports, and we can rely on the debt information, that both short-term and long-term debt information on their financial statement. But that's not the case for government. So, but what makes the difference is that we have reliable accounting standards, accrual accounting standards in the private sector, but governments are not complying with IPSAS, which is based on accrual. So the point then I want to make is that international public sector accounting standards, IPSAS, is a solution for many of these issues. And as for instance, there are many benefits that we could think about if a country were to adopt IPSAS accrual. One is the consolidation of all of government's accounts. And this will mean having information on the financial and non-financial obligations of public sector entities beyond central government. A lot of the debts are hidden in SOEs, state-owned enterprises, and subnational governments, okay? But all of that can be brought together if you are complying with appropriate, robust international public sector accounting standards. Then we can also talk about another benefit, which is evaluation of debt. So how are you, there are a number of complex debt creating arrangements now that governments are entering into, okay? This needs to be valued at fair value, okay? If you comply with it, if a country is complying with IPSAS, I think then you can be able to have that better economic reality in terms of valuation of debt. Then another important aspect is the independent verification and data integrity, because some of the data currently on debt is maintained in makeshift records and so on and so forth. They are not necessarily covered by independent audit. But if they are part of the regular accounting reporting system, then the government auditors can be able to opine on them. But I must say that there are also challenges with implementation of IPSAS. Okay, for instance, IPSAS is not regulated among governments as financial reporting is done in the private sector. So some countries may apply some IPSAS, not apply others, and that may raise an issue on integrity of the records. But there are ways to be able to manage that. For instance, countries can be mandated to really report on the extent to which they are deviating from the standards. Then there are also implementation challenges that we could talk about or in our client countries, especially in Asia and Africa. For instance, technical know-how, institutional capacity, and also resource constraint that Mark just spoke about. But this is an area then where the World Bank and the broader donor community can come together and support these countries to improve their public financial management system, including accounting and financial reporting. And this will really contribute in a long way going forward. So finally, let me just conclude by saying that more comprehensive financial information that most countries in Asia and Africa currently produce is necessary to better assess the financial health and sustainability of governments, including the debt burden that you spoke about. So comprehensive financial information is needed to adopt what we will call a balance sheet approach to managing public finances. We need a balance sheet approach to managing public finances. And that is not possible without implementing accurate financial reporting. Let me stop there. Thank you, Richard. Back to you.
Many thanks, Ed. The quality of the system is just as important as having the system. Thank you again, Ed, and everyone on the panel for your very insightful responses so far. I'm sure the attendees appreciate the information you've shared. I'll turn over now to Srini, who will moderate the second round of questioning that we may have. Srini, over to you.
Thanks, Richard. Thanks, everyone. This has been a very interesting conversation so far. The next round, let us do something similar to a kind of a rapid fire round with the responses, trying to keep it kind of quick responses to cover in the next about 17 minutes that we have. Let me start off with I'll club some of the chat questions and pose to the panelists. Let me start off with Mr. Dorji. So can you talk a little bit about how you dealt with the COVID-19 related issues through the PFM systems during the recent times, and did past PEFA assessments help you? And also relate to this debate of one of the questions from Dan, the one size fit all versus country specific reforms. How did probably Bhutan work through it to ensure that the reforms are country specific?
Thank you. Very inspiring to listen to all the experts talking about PFM. To be precise and to respond to your question on how Bhutan responded to COVID-19 and did PFM reform still survive and sustain the pandemic, I think, as I highlighted in my remarks, Bhutan has made tremendous progress in the PFM reforms. And when we talk about reform, two aspects. One is the PFM itself, improving on standards and also procedures and processes. The other one is ensuring the development of systems. So therefore, Bhutan has embarked on the system development. And as I highlighted, we have moved away from check-based and cash-based payment to electronic payment system, which we call it EPEMS, electronic payment system that we have promoted. And COVID, as we were hit by the pandemic, starting from March and our preparation, and then we went into lockdown sometimes in August and then also in December. During this period, the PFM reform missions, consultations with our experts continued on an uninterrupted basis. As we all know, the new normal is through virtual and then through online engagement. So this continued. Firstly, secondly, our PFM system, which is a multi-year rolling budget and then electronic payment system, continued to support the whole financial transactions during the pandemic and especially under the lockdown. One of the major reform initiated by His Majesty the King of Bhutan is to provide relief to the people who were displaced due to the COVID, due to the pandemic. And these people were located across the country, and they were provided livelihood support or income support so that they could make a living out of living during this lockdown and during the period. And what we have used is we have used the electronic payment system, we call it EPEMS, to support payment, and it reached out to the individuals across the country and these people did not have to travel to government offices to collect their livelihood. So the payment system affected direct transfer to the individual account where they can withdraw and make expenditure. So that is one of the successful outcome of the PFM reform, which has served our purpose. And then also other aspects, the government services, especially related to PFM, be it expenditure management or be it payment of taxes online, continued uninterrupted. And then we have provided full support around the clock so that it helped people to do so. Then on the reform, does one size fit for all? Yes and no. Yes, because the basic principle of PFM is same for a small and a big country. No, because again, the system requirement for a small country like Bhutan, our system requirement is very small, but for a country like India and then other countries where the system requirement is so huge, the investment size is so huge. So therefore, one size fit for all may not work. For Bhutan, the system development has been done indigenously within our own system. Ministry of Finance has been developing most of the systems within ourselves. So this has helped our purpose. So therefore, during the COVID, the pandemic, the reform has really helped Bhutan respond to the COVID very effectively and then also ensure timely delivery of public services, especially when it comes to public expenditure, public procurement, and also delivering payment systems. So it has really helped Bhutan. It has really helped Bhutan prepare for the COVID. That's what we could see when we reflect now. So on the whole, I think PFM reform is a continuous process, and it should incorporate a new normal now going forward, that the COVID has given us so much lessons that even despite your preparedness, there could be certain level of challenges. And the main thing is that we write on the internet. So therefore, what is needed is stability of internet services so that your services could be delivered. So this is what I would like to highlight. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And I love the yes and no. And that's what we believe also in the PEFA Secretariat. Absolutely. Sometimes it's yes, but the country context gets very important. Let me turn to Mr. Pinaka, Dr. Pinaka Chakrabarti. Quickly, Dr. Chakrabarti. So we all keep hearing about reform prioritization. So it's a cliched term. So, but is it really it also draws from Mr. George's comment. So from India context, how do you see that reform prioritization? And several comments in the chat box from India. One about the flow of funds from center to state, how the mechanism works. And that's from Amit. And are there good practices that could be improved? If you have any reflections. And two, also if there are state level PFM assessments, you mentioned this in your initial comment. So how better can states align with the good PFM practices? Over to Pinaka. You may be mute.
Thank you, Srini, and I would like to highlight very quickly that an efficient PFM system not only helps efficient use of fund, also it gives us better value for money, and from that context, sequencing reform is very, very, very important. So a couple of very quick things on the question of fund flow. I think this is an established system in terms of money flowing from the state to the center. I think what is most important in the Indian context to discuss is the state to the local governments, because after 73rd and 74th constitutional amendment, there have been a lot of changes taking place on a continuous basis when it comes to state to the local governments, and local governments are also given more responsibilities in terms of service delivery. I think as Mr. Dorji said, yes, I know about one size fits all or not. I think it is also important to look at the third tier. I think 15th Finance Commission has made significant amount of, done significant amount of work and very important recommendations about, how we should go about, managing the third tier. I think that is one area of PFM that we need to look at, and fund flow issue comes there, because from center to state, it's certainly not a major issue, because money flows through a system which is over the year built and very, very, very strong. On the question of, I just wanted to talk about, some of the fiscal transparency issues post-COVID. I think independent evaluation is very important, and as an institution, and IPFP does independent evaluation at the request of the state government, their management of state finances and FRBM. So that is one issue. CAG does for the central government. So there is a system and process in terms of fiscal transparency and management of FRBM. I think that has to strengthen, because debt is increasing. We are talking about high debt, high growth, high expenditure, and also budget credibility. So in all these contexts, these will become very important, and that sequencing becomes absolutely critical. So I stop at that. Thank you very much. Can I make the last point on this, if you allow me, on the question of gender and child budgeting? I think in India, gender consideration in design and implementation has been taken forward with the gender budget statement in the center in 2005, and all the states have gender budget statement, and many states now also have child budget statement. We are talking about nutrition review. So there is a lot of focus on redistributive expenditure aspects of the budget, and give them a specific focus in overall PFM management and public financial policy. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Pinaka. Let me turn to Hakken. A quick comment, Hakken, if you can make on development partners' role in tailoring the PFM reforms better for country requirements, and relate to a question on the chat box. Do we need to look at PEFA 2.0? Since PEFA already, many countries are already doing good progress on PEFA. Any comments from your side? Hakken?
Yeah, thank you, Srini. Well, on the role of the development partners, I would say that as Rachel mentioned in her introduction, there are difficult role often for the development partner to support, and development partners often bring solutions from their own countries and often best practice, and especially in low income countries and low middle income countries in Africa and Asia. Development partners tend to expect more than is realistic, and often don't promote the best fit to the country. So I guess we still have a huge challenge in better tailoring PFM reforms, although it is challenging in practice. But some experiences we know, and this includes that any reform project needs a clear backing and commitment from the government, and government should lead the reforms and preferably also drive the reforms. And we also know that development partners should have a good focus on process and not only on solutions. And often it's best to build on solutions that or systems that already are in place, or analysis that has already been done. And so it's also a matter of being flexible then, and almost always try to simplify what can be done, and be open and try out the different possible solutions. So this means that the development partners have a challenge to try to step back and have a more facilitating role, and this might include facilitating peer-to-peer cooperation between sister institutions. This is an area that Norway is supporting quite broadly in tax and Supreme Audit supports. And it has also shown important to have a long and trusted relationship and to make results, because improving PFM system is usually a long-term process. So that is also crucial. Yes, that was my comments, Srini. Thank you.
Thanks, Hakken. In the 3 to 4 minutes that we have in the session, let me squeeze in 2 questions. First to Mark. Mark, your reflections on the accountability chain, typically the scrutiny of by Auditor General, the Supreme Audit Institution, and the legislature reviewing the reports. How do you see the storyline developing globally in the current context?
Well, I think so. There's two issues. I mean, one, we see some of the challenges around kind of oversight and flexibility. We're seeing a lot at the moment in the crisis and difficulties in balancing those two things. And that's not just a challenge in Asia and Africa. That's a challenge in my own country. We're seeing in the newspapers at the moment. So I think that's, a universal challenge and particularly difficult at this moment. I think the second thing I'd say is that, I recognise that the scores in the presentation for the auditors are low. I think we need to be a bit sceptical about saying, because these scores are lower, this makes this area weaker. I think we really need to dig into some of what these indicators mean. I haven't had time to do that in truth. So I guess I'd want to understand a bit more, well, what are the specific weaknesses that these diagnostic studies are identifying, rather than, just saying, okay, the scores are weaker, therefore it's an issue. I think the third thing, that is a common issue that you see is that a lot of is around the gap between audit findings and actually following up on them. And so there's the kind of, we can have good accountability on paper, but how much is kind of the SAI or the legislature actually using the information that's provided to hold governments to account? And I'll stop there because I know you're trying to keep us to time.
Thanks, Mark. And let me turn to Ed. Ed, World Bank is providing so much of funding during COVID-19. And generally, you hear so much noise about lack of transparency and corruption. What is World Bank doing to solve the problem of corruption, not only in its own projects, but globally?
Okay, thanks, Srini. So I will try also to see how I can take 2 minutes or 1 minute to answer that question. No, let's understand one fact, that corruption is an age-long problem. And helping our client countries to tackle these problems remains an important focus of the World Bank. So we are supporting countries to improve public financial management, including public procurement, to tackle the issue of corruption and to improve efficiency and effectiveness in the use of public funds. We are also supporting countries to improve transparency, including in procurement, to introduce open government, including open contracting. We are supporting rule of law and justice reforms and the strengthening of oversight agencies like Supreme Audit institutions in various countries. These are all very important. So let me highlight some recent initiatives that the bank has taken in this area. In 2019, we published the bank's anti-corruption initiatives, reaffirming commitment to a development priority. And this paper calls for a new thinking and scaling up what has worked to tackle the global and local challenges that countries face today. In September 2020, that is last year, we issued a global report on anti-corruption entitled Enhancing Government Effectiveness and Transparency, the Fight Against Corruption. This report documents reforms and tools that have been effective in tackling corruption in different contexts and aspects of government. Now, we are currently building on the initiative paper outlined, that is the 2019 Anti-Corruption Initiatives paper, and also the 2020 Global Report, and we are developing an action plan to help countries tackle corruption in the post-COVID world. So these are some of the things that we are doing. And as you know, in the case of our support for emergency funding, I have to mention that the bank has a clear focus on ensuring that our emergency funding was used in a transparent manner and that corruption is appropriately prevented. And we deployed our golden standard fiduciary work to ensure that. So that is very important to know. So we, as a bank, we continue also to provide advice to governments. I won't go into the details, but those advice focus more on improving systems, on improving efficiency, and also bringing in the issue of citizen engagement. So let me just conclude closely. By saying that governments around the world are spending huge amounts of money, okay, to address the health and emergency crisis posed by COVID-19. Without robust PFM systems, including mechanisms to hold governments accountable, there is a high risk of corruption and inefficiency. So going forward, we need governments and development partners to pay attention to strengthening PFM to ensure integrity and efficiency in public spending. And so this is an area we will, as a bank, remain engaged in. Thank you. Back to you.
Thanks, and continue to pay attention to strengthen PFM systems. I'm sure all of us echo that view. And friends, that's all the time we have today for this session. And on behalf of the chair of the session, Rachel, let me express my profound gratitude and thanks to our panelists, Mr. Dorji, Dr. Chakrabarti, Mr. Hakken, Mundal, Mark Miller, and Ed. So the conversations have been brilliant and the chats have been excellent. We are taking note of all the chats which have come in. So we'll further process it and we'll try to produce some knowledge pieces around that. Colleagues, on behalf of also the PEFA Secretariat, we would invite all of you to connect with us and actually exchange together work through the agenda for post-COVID-19 world PFM systems. So it could be into many dimensions. We are expecting in this year, which is 20 years, 2 decades of PEFA, we are doing every month a knowledge event to synthesize the global trends that we are seeing and set the course for the future of PFM. Thank you very much to everyone connecting and have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you very much.
Thanks all. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
See you again. Bye, Rachel.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
So much.
Bye.